choices, bad financial decisions, and sometimes even some unreasonable risk-taking that we think is beneficial, but it's really kind of not if we don't take into consideration all of the information. Something that you guys might be familiar with, especially if you're on the internet. This is kind of a fun cartoon that I found from chainsawsuit.com. So you have somebody on the internet who's like, I've heard rhetoric from both sides. Let me search on Google. And then, you know, literally the first link that agrees with them, that's the one they go with. They're like, woohoo, I'm going to throw that study out there and talk to people because I found something that completely reinforces my perspective. But I'm going to ignore everything else. That's a type of bias that we associate with confirmation bias. So with confirmation bias, we're going to get into that here in just a minute. So I'm going to pull up all of these biases here, and I'm not going to make you memorize all of these right away. But these are essentially the 20 biases that I'm going to talk to you about today. But I'm going to break them down individually. We're not going to sit here and go through and make you look at the screen this whole time, because that would just be torture, wouldn't it? So let's get up what I want you guys to look at, piece by piece, essentially. The first one I want to talk about is anchoring bias. All right, this is where we kind of get over-reliant on a particular type of the first bit of info that we get. So we assume that the very first bit of information we get is factual. Rather than hearing everything else, you know, it's kind of like, where did I hear the information first? And this was a problem, especially back in the day where reputation was extremely important. Whoever told you the information first is the one that is correct. So that's a type of bias, an anchoring bias we have to be careful with. Availability heuristic. That's where we overestimate the importance of some kind of information, and kind of, we see this often with anecdotal. So we might have an individual who has a great aunt that smokes 3 packs of cigarettes a day, lived to be 100, and they didn't develop cancer. So you're like, well, my great aunt didn't get cancer from smoking cigarettes. Or my sister went to the tanning bed and never got skin cancer. Or a doctor might say, oh, you have Alzheimer's. And you're like, you know what? Alzheimer's doesn't run in my family. So it's got to be something else. So availability heuristic is taking information and over-relying on it and assuming that there's, you know, it's important. So we see it with anecdotal type of situations. Bandwagon. If you're not familiar with the bandwagon effect, then you probably haven't been on the internet and understand that there's a movement called anti-vaxxers. Bandwagon is so common. This is the protection in numbers, where the more people you see that believe a particular thing, the more believable it is, and how some people consider it to be true. Blind spot bias. This is probably exceedingly common, especially when you're dealing with people who are heavily bigoted. They think they have no bias. That's incorrect and scientifically impossible. Everybody has bias, but that doesn't make us bad people. That just means we have bias. So people who assume they have no bias whatsoever, that's a bias in itself. Then you have something called choice supportive bias. This is where you make a choice and it makes you happy. And it could be a flawed choice, but it still makes you happy, and so you kind of stick to it. So you might say homeopathy is a little bit of a choice supportive bias. Homeopathy, and I'll talk about placebo effect. If you make a particular choice, I'm going to drink this solution that has this much strychnine in it, and it makes me feel better. It makes me happy. I feel like I can do things. So even though it's a flawed choice, there's absolutely no medicinal value whatsoever in it, you pick it because it makes you happy. Or if you have a dog that is never mean to you or your family but bites other kids in the neighborhood, you're still going to choose your dog, you know, even if it's a flawed choice that your dog is mean to everybody else. So that's kind of an example of choice supportive bias. So these kind of go together, these particular ones. We have clustering illusion, confirmation bias, information bias, ostrich effect, and conservatism. So I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit quickly. You might be familiar with them already. Clustering or illusion. Our brains are fantastic. We tend to see patterns in entirely random events. This is why we're able to see faces in like wooden doors or faces in mirrors, and we think, oh, it's a ghost. Or you might even see patterns in gambling. For instance, I've hit this jackpot. I know it's hit on the diamond 4 times, and then it hit on the 2 diamonds 3 times, and then it'll probably hit on all 3 diamonds, 2 more times. So you're trying to find patterns in entirely random events. Confirmation bias. This is one most people are familiar with. This is where individuals only accept evidence that supports their perspective. So they'll ignore any other forms of evidence that are opposing their particular views and accept the ones that do. Conservatism. This is, we have always done it this way type of bias, where you think, and it's hard for you to shift from old information and accept new information. Just because something's always been done a particular way doesn't mean it's good, doesn't mean it's better, doesn't even mean it's more efficient. People used to think the earth was flat. Apparently some still do. And they also used to think the earth was the center of the universe. And so they were slow to moving away from that. That's conservatism bias, being unable to accept new information, but holding on to older information. Now, I know everybody here has been guilty of information bias, where you have an illness and you go and Google all of the symptoms, and then, you know, you have cancer, AIDS, and a cold. So information bias is where you have too much information and it's not always good. So if you have a lot of information floating around in your head and you aren't particularly like a medical expert, you may diagnose yourself with all kinds of things that you don't really have. So less information is better in that regard. Ostrich effect. That is where we ignore dangerous and negative information. And, you know, to be honest, a lot of the news can be negative and dark and not happy, and sometimes people don't want to look at it, and that's okay. Shut it off for a while until you feel better. But keep in mind, we can't ignore information because it doesn't make us happy. So that's a form of what we call ostrich effect. If it's something that we don't like, we still need to know about it. Outcome bias. We're almost done with the 20 biases. You guys are doing great. So these we see a lot, especially on the internet. If you get involved in any kind of internet debates, or people come into my messages and send me all kinds of information, they don't take into consideration everything. So this is outcome bias. This is where they make judgments based on the outcome and not how the decision was made. So for example, we can look at this in science. We look at how Watson and Crick discovered the helical structure of DNA, and you're like, yay, they discovered this, but they stole this lady's data. But they discovered this, but they stole Rosalind Franklin's information. So people might say, well, it's good that they discovered this, and, you know, they did steal her stuff and all, but, you know, this is important. So the judgment based on the Nobel people, they didn't offer it to her after she had passed away, because they don't normally do that sort of thing, but we know that they have. You know, so the judgment was based on the outcome and not how the decision was made. People often do this with gambling, and if they get a clean bill of health, they're like, well, you know, I had unprotected sex with all these people and I still don't have an STI, so that's okay, yay for me. And you're like, well, you know, you still need to take precautions and you need to be careful. And just because you won all that money on that horse race doesn't mean gambling was a wise decision either. So this is outcome bias. We also have something called overconfidence, where people are too confident in their knowledge and abilities. You can often see this on YouTube and also in the form of the Darwin Awards, where people think that they're able to do something and they're confident they can do something, and then you have grave consequences in a lot of cases. But we also see this on the internet when people seem to think that they know more than experts. And sometimes experts they have to keep that overconfidence in check because they don't know everything all the time either. So, you know, we have a little bit on both sides there. I mentioned homeopathy. So the placebo effect. It makes me feel better, so it must mean it's actual medicine. No, if it makes you feel better, that's great, but you got to understand homeopathy has no medicinal value. So we've got to make certain that just because something makes us feel better doesn't necessarily mean it has any biochemical type of reaction actually going on. Some of you guys in IT or in app development or in any kind of tech-related fields may be familiar with pro-innovation bias. This is where you overvalue something in regards to its usefulness. New and shiny doesn't necessarily mean it's useful. So you could have a particular app or a particular online forum that you're like, this is going to be new and innovative, and it may not add any kind of value to what's already there in any kind of form. So that's overvaluing a particular usefulness of a particular thing when you know, just because it's new and shiny doesn't mean it's useful at all. Another thing that I like to look at, and some scientists are guilty of this, and that's recency. That's where you have latest information is not necessarily how it's always going to be forever. And science is a testament to that. It is constantly changing. And it's not changing in a backwards direction per se, but whenever you get new information, it should build on previous knowledge. Now, some people might just exclusively stick to what the new information is and not pay attention to past studies. Past studies are still useful. We need to know where we came from. So old information isn't always bad. It depends on what it is. Me being an analytical chemist in regards to developing cancer tests, I customarily would not read anything beyond 5 years old unless it was like theory-based information that I needed to understand, like plasma and resonance, how a mass spec works. That's different. But innovating and developing new cancer tests, if it was more than 5 years old, it wasn't relevant for my research. So recency is important, but only in highly specified disciplines. And the last little bit, and then we've covered all the biases, and then we're going to talk about how are they used. So salience. Salience is a kind of a way of romanticizing things. This is where you focus most easily on recognizable features. Some people can romanticize death. They might think of death as, you know, some kind of phenomenal thing where death would be like getting mauled by a tiger, eaten by a shark. They don't think, I'm driving down the street and I'm going to die. Salience is focusing on recognizable features, romanticizing a particular thing without actually taking into account what its reality is. Selective perception. I used to have something that I used when I taught high schoolers called selective deafness. They'd only hear part of what I'd say and not all of it. Selective perception is something different. This is where our expectations influence what we see. We are going to tend to find fault in an opposing group more so than we are in our own group. So we see a lot of political debates, especially on the internet. Well, they'll be like, liberals are always doing this. Look at you, look at you, look at you. But they ignore everything going on in their own group. Or, you know, Republicans are always doing this and this and this. But then they ignore everything going on in their own group. We see this with different types of games. We can see this in football or soccer. You'll see one particular group say, look at the opposing team. They had, you know, they touched and grabbed that person over there. They tripped that guy over there. Look at that. But they don't see the own fouls in their own teams. This is selective perception. Stereotyping. This is where we can kind of get into the racism, sexism, you know, ageism, ableism type of thing. That's where we have expectations of a particular group or an individual to have specific qualities without accurate information. Oftentimes, an example of that would be seeing somebody with a handicap parking sticker. You say parents don't want to face facts about their kids. Yeah, sometimes that's the case too. And being a former educator, I have seen how some parents wanted to place a lot of responsibility on me on their child's behavior. And so that you have to be very cautious in the type of dialogue you use in regards to those type of meetings. And so when we're looking at stereotyping, an example, you may not always have the information. There could be a woman who's able to walk from her car to the store, and she may have a handicap sticker, and some people will be like, oh, look at her. Why is she using, that's probably her grandmother's car, you know. How dare she take this, you know, handicap spot? She's faking it. For all you know, she might have asthma. She might have a particular muscle disorder where she can't walk long distances. Just because somebody has a handicap sticker on their car doesn't mean that they're unable to actually move or walk from their car. Maybe they can't do it for long distances. Not all illnesses are visible to you. So this is an example of stereotyping, or assuming a particular race or a particular gender is going to have qualities that you think are associated with that. This is where bias becomes exceedingly harmful and oppressive towards other people. So let's talk about survivorship. This is fun for me, especially for a scientist, because oftentimes I get people that pop into my messages and my ats. They're like, well, science is all about this. It's all about succeeding and having this happen. About 99, I say maybe 95% of science is messing up all the time. Takes practice to generate plausible explanations. It really does take practice to do that. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with practicing it here and there at home sometimes, especially if you're a communicator. So in regards to survivorship bias, a lot of people tend to focus on the end product. We look at Einstein, E equals mc squared. It's a simplistic equation, and it makes total sense. But all of the failures and all of the people who failed trying to get this equation out, nobody really pays attention to that. Because we're wired for paranoia. Sometimes we can be. We can be wired for paranoia to a degree, you know, so that comes to that evolutionary advantage of the fight or flight, but that's on a survivorship type, or, you know, a survival type of basis. So when we apply it to social and work and intellectual conversation and engagement and making decisions based on our life that we have time to think about, that's when we need to kind of remove that bias. And so going back to survivorship bias quickly, people don't think about all of the failure. Some people may think it's easy being an engineer. I just do this math and I build this here. There's a whole lot of failure that leads to a particular product. It's just about resilience. You have to be resilient and come back to it. But people don't take into consideration just how much failure happens in science. As an old IT person, there are language biases. People who say one language is better than another. Yeah, so I mean, you know, that could be the pro-innovation thing. So just because a new language pops up doesn't mean it's useful in regards to computers. It depends on the situation. That could be true too. And then the last bias is zero risk bias, where people are like, let's see, Edward de Bono has a graphic of backwards entrance. Hindsight is 2020. Yes, exactly. And so the last bias I'm going to talk about before we talk about how to identify our own biases and what to do about it is zero risk bias. There is comfort in certainty. People like to know they're 100% safe. They like their little bubbles of existence. They're like, if I step outside of this is, you know, I might run the risk of something. So people want to eliminate risk, even if it isn't productive. So this is the zero risk bias, and we can see this in medical decisions. People might say, oh, wait, you know, anti-vaxxers. If this has this little small amount of this preservative, that might be bad for me, or I might have a reaction to this vaccine, even though I have no family medical history of that, I'm not going to get this vaccine. They're worried. And they want that zero risk bias to where they want a particular medical treatment to be 100% safe. That is impossible. That is impossible because there are things that can happen that are outside the control of the doctor. So they prefer to have that zero risk bias, even if it is not a productive, or even if it is a counterproductive decision to go and do that. So I'm going to talk about, let me jump back to center this here. I don't want to throw all those words at you. So something we've got to think about in regards to this. Biases are not individual. People think, oh, I have this one bias. You can have a whole lot of them, and they can be grouped together. So an example, I've talked a bit about medical. Doctors practice on their patient clients. Yes, it is a practice. It doesn't mean that they're bad at it. It means that, you know, practice is important, but at the same time, they get additional training. But there are things that are outside of their control. So if we talk about medical decisions, you might have availability heuristic mixed with overconfidence and a blind spot. So let's say you don't have a history of Alzheimer's in your family, and you go to the doctor and you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and then they say, well, you know, your doctor, you know, it's like you have early stages of Alzheimer's, and you might say, well, no one in my family has Alzheimer's. My doctor doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know my family. We don't get sick like that. That's availability heuristic mixed with overconfidence in your family's genetics. In addition to, you might even not realize that you have your own biases. You say, I don't have any bias in this. So that's an example of 3 different biases all combined together in one big old spot. You could have the bandwagon effect. And I mentioned the anti-vaxxers with that. They have not only bandwagon effect, if you've ever had any of them approach you, they also have confirmation bias. They pick studies that reinforce their perspective, and they ignore anything that is not part of their perspective. And they may also ignore their own negative or dangerous studies that are associated with not vaccinating your children. So that's the ostrich effect. So you have 3 different ones combined together just in that one particular spot. So these are some of the ways that multiple types of bias can compound on one another. Excuse me, I'm still getting over a bit of ickiness. So let's talk about where we see all of these particular things. It's like newbie computer learners trying to make the tech fixer responsible for their user error. Yes, user error is a real thing in IT. Oh, goodness. So let's talk about how these biases are used against you. Newmarket, Ontario, okay? So if we look at these biases, where do we see them and how are they used on you? It's rampant in the news and the internet. Now, the Associated Press do have articles on how journalists can eliminate bias, but they also say they kind of need bias too in order to appeal to the viewers. So news groups use bias in order to get you to listen to them. Advertisers rely on your various forms of bias, and they can do that through going against the ostrich effect. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And so they might say, look at this scary, negative, awful thing. This is how we fix it. You know, and then they kind of downplay. You know, we see this also with medications in regards to advertising. Do you have this particular pain? Well, if you get this will like take care of all of it. But shh, don't listen to all these side effects over here. You know? Let's talk about how to negotiate to communicate with confronting bias. Well, yes, this is what we can do too. And then the other way, people in power can use their bias. As we see, they can use it on individuals in the form of stereotyping, which is where it becomes very problematic, especially when we get into the bigotry and the sexism and the racism and the things like that. So let's talk about how do you recognize your own types of bias. So I'm going to pop over and talk about, I'm not going to make you look at all those words. So let's talk about your own biases. All right. So everyone has it. Everyone has bias. And we need to keep that in mind. That doesn't make us bad people, but we've got to keep it in check. And it's really easy to spot other people's bias, but it's harder to spot our own. And so that's one thing that scientists have a hard time with, but the thing that we do is we use instrumentation and peer review to overcome bias. You suspect selective descriptive words and metaphors. Well, when you're dealing with individuals who have a particular bias, if you know what they are and you know what your bias is, there are ways to communicate facts to where you can utilize their biases to help them understand your perspective. That takes a lot of self-awareness, though, in understanding what the biases are. So that's where you have to kind of educate yourself. Now, scientists, in order for us to overcome our bias, we rely on repeatable data to show us what the truth and facts actually are. And in this regard, scientists are held to a higher standard for honesty for this reason. So they're expected to not lie, to not commit fraud. That's why there's steep penalties, including jail, for scientists who lie. And so we have to, as scientists, address our own bias. So when you're working or you're talking to an individual who has a perspective that you feel is might be harmful, maybe they're racist, maybe, but they're willing to listen to you. It's important to understand their perspective and to understand what they're basing their decisions on so you can address it. That's one way to interact with somebody when you know what their bias is, whether it's stereotyping, an ostrich effect. You have to understand the ostrich effect is based in fear. So if you kind of understand where these particular biases come from, people tend to hold on to their biases because it makes them feel better. And we know this because that's why people, well, we've always done this way. There's comfort in routine. So you have to be willing to address where these biases are rooted. They're rooted in fear. People choose them because it makes them feel good. So you've got to keep this in mind. Was surprised, realized you had a biased assumption of lying from lazy-eyed persons. Well, so you thought that they were lying to you because they had an eye that didn't look directly at you all the time. Okay, well, people, as long as you understand what your biases are, it's easier to keep that in check. And it also helps you to be able to have a little bit of empathy. And it's hard to do. Oh, okay, yes. It's hard to do sometimes, especially when somebody is so opposed to a particular view that you may have. And if they have a harmful one, it makes it even more difficult to kind of dismantle that fear. But you've got to understand a lot of bias is rooted in fear, and people hold on to certain biases because it makes them more comfortable. So how do we eliminate bias? What do we do to eliminate it? It can be an entirely scary thing for some people. So we want to avoid bias without it being an inherent issue. So I'm going to go back to my centered so you don't have to stare at words the whole time. I'm trying to do better with that. So what about bias? Some bias is okay. It's okay to have certain biases, especially in snap decisions where your life is on the line. That's important. Food preferences, TV, you might have a food preference because you don't like a particular type of food. Maybe it's made you ill in the past. Certain types of TV shows, maybe you avoid certain types of shows because they make you feel bad or you have bad dreams or something. So some bias is okay. But bias that's oppressing or harming other people is not. And so what you have to do is kind of take a good long look in the mirror. Self-awareness is enlightening for yourself, and it also helps you understand other people a bit better. Everyone has bias, and people assume that because they have bias, this makes them bad people. It doesn't. It makes us human. We have to have some forms of bias. It's part of our evolutionary development. What is the difference between gut feeling and prejudice? I'm going to talk about that. Prejudice is where you have time to make a decision. Gut feeling is primarily useful when you have snap decisions. For instance, as a woman, I've had to deal with all kinds of unsavory advances towards me when I'm walking down the street. And so I've learned my gut feeling because of my own personal biases. I don't like to be around large groups of men at a gas station near a car close to mine. So what do? I get on my phone and I pretend I'm on the phone talking to somebody. So maybe that will deter them. That's almost automatic now. So I have automatic reactions based on past experiences and gut feeling. That's a snap decision. All right. Now, if I have to deal with a large group of men at a gas station that I'm meeting there for whatever reason, maybe they're work colleagues, I have time to make a valid decision without having to rely so heavy on, is this safe or not? So that's much different. Hitchhiking snap judgment is handy. But if you have time to make a decision, that's far different than making a snap decision where your life is based on the line. That's kind of where your gut does kind of play a role, and gut instincts are good for making certain types of decisions based on whether or not you want to work somewhere. You might have had experiences in the past where a certain type of behavior that you've seen makes for a hostile work environment. Now, you might take that information, but you don't want to solely make your decision based on that gut instinct. You want to take other types of information and kind of formulate together and spend some time making a particular decision. Gut instinct should not be solely what you decide on any major decision. Choosing a teacher when you know nothing about the subject. Well, see, if you're going to choose a teacher at university, one thing you can do is talk to people who've had that teacher before. Various people. Look at what they teach on the internet, as far as like their syllabus. What did they cover? Talk to people. Were they available in tutoring? Were they able to meet outside of the class? You can get a large amount of information just from talking to other people who have had that teacher, and you can find forums about it on the internet. So it's possible to make a decision based on, mixing a little bit with gut information, but you don't want that to be your sole, the sole thing that you base your decision on. You need to get other forms of information. And so, your best teachers had very different stories from students, and that can be the thing, but if you get consistent stories from a particular, about a particular teacher being one way, then you're more likely to have an accurate type of thing, an accurate idea, like maybe this is not the best teacher for me. So you might be like, what are my biases? I don't know what to do. What am I going to do about biases? This is a scary thing. How are we going to handle that? And so these are all valid questions. You might be freaking out because best teachers tailored their approach. Yeah, that's true. So what can you do to determine your bias? Well, to be honest, Harvard has a bias test that you can take. There are various different educational resource sites for teachers because teachers have to eliminate bias when it comes to educating their students. Me being a former teacher, I had to work and learn what my own biases were in order to address them. So as I was instructing and grading, I had to have a rubric that I followed every time to where I didn't just go through and be biased based on a particular student. You're biased towards rebellion. Oh, okay. So if I had a rubric and then I found a student that misbehaved in my class regularly, I didn't want to dock them extra points for an answer, because they were acting up in my class. So you had to address what your biases are. So there's a lot of educational websites you can go to and take bias tests. And at the end of this presentation, I do have all my links available. I'll post these slides on my website, ScientistMel.com, and you can go and click on those links and take these bias tests for yourself. Now, don't get offended by your bias. If you have a bias that you find is personally that offends you, Oh, you're welcome. If you have a bias that you know is offensive, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a little bit sexist. I really, I have a bias towards, giving, spending and doing stuff more with guys and helping them out when I do women. I have a bias towards a particular race. Everybody has bias, and don't get offended by that. But what you need to do is address it and pay attention. Realize that you have a tendency to do a thing. There's a particular thing that you have a tendency to do. And so kind of keep that in check. Work to address it when you make your choices or when you're interacting with people, especially in the workplace or in a social situation. You can address those in how you talk to individuals and make certain that you're using mindful type of language, especially if you have a bias towards a particular race, gender, any of these. Age, there's ageism. Ageism is pretty prevalent. I don't think people realize that. And spend time making your decisions. That gives you a chance to address your bias and say, okay, I'm making this decision, or I'm trying to develop an opinion on a thing or a judgment on a thing. Make certain you have your biases in check. Say, okay, I have a tendency to get really angry about this particular thing here, and I don't want to read this negative information. That's the ostrich effect. Okay, you had to learn open-handed gestures on purpose. Oh, okay. So spend time making your decisions. Check your sources for accuracy. A lot of people don't do that. They think a particular news source is because they're like, this is always accurate. Well, not always. Sometimes news groups mess up and they say the wrong thing. So check multiple sources. And realize you don't know everything. And that's okay. I don't know everything either. And that's all right. And I got 4 degrees and I still don't know everything. I can't possibly know everything. So realize you don't know everything. Excuse me. The other thing we need to do, I'm sorry, I'm still getting over a cold. We have got to separate random events from predictable ones. Excuse me. Often a social mystery why people react the way they do. Indeed. But a lot of that can be from their various biases, so that could be a factor. We need to be able to recognize when an event is random and when it is expected and predictable. The more I learn, the less I know. That's entirely true. I have existential crisis regularly because, I learn a lot and I'm going, oh my gosh, I know nothing. And the other thing that you can do to help eliminate your bias, and especially when you're talking to somebody who has conflicting views from your own, look for those sources and look for any studies that contradict your particular perspectives or your judgments. That can be quite useful, especially if you're having to engage with people that have vastly different perspectives and views from your own, or if you have to work with somebody who's sexist or racist or ableist or bigoted. Try to see their point of view, look at their sources, look at studies that reinforce their sources so you can kind of arm yourself, and it'll also keep your own biases in check. For women, we must choose between being an authority and using rapport. Well, I don't know. But you have to kind of keep things in check and keep things in mind, because not every woman is going to be responsive to any particular thing. So it's important to get all of your information before you act. So our last bit to kind of like wrap up here. This has been a really cool talk. What is cognitive bias? It's a mistake we have in reasoning. It's error in our evaluation. It's opinion-based, belief-based, preference-based. We hold on to our biases because they make us feel good. They make us happy. They help us feel like we're safe. We have our zero risk bias, So these are comforts to us. So a lot of people, they hold on to these biases because they're comforting to them. But it's problematic because it can cause issues for other people when you're using them to make decisions and judgments outside of snap decisions that you have to make. that are survival skills and survival based. That's completely different. And that's what these biases are normally used for. And that's why we have them, is for that survival instinct. But when we're dealing in everyday life in a workplace, or if our job is based in science and we have to teach, we have to keep these biases in check so we're more effective that way and we don't cause problems for other people. So what do? We check our sources, and we need to learn what our biases are. Bias doesn't make us bad people. They don't make us bad people. Don't confuse me with facts when I've already decided. Yes, that's challenging. Then you have to ask, why have you made this decision? What have you based this decision on? Because I'm curious. I want to learn more about you. So you can kind of go with that. You need to generate a space where a person feels safe to talk to you as well. That's another thing. We also can see these types of biases used in predators, and something I didn't mention here, but I have on my podcast on episode 6, which will be live soon for the general population. It's always early release for my patrons on Patreon, is predators can use this, and they rely on biases to hurt their victims and to actually rally other people to go against their victims. So that's something that you have to kind of keep an eye on. Advertisers use biases against us. News groups, people in power use biases against us. And more recently, we see in the news about, Harvey Weinstein and these other individuals that were in places of power, that other people knew what was going on, but they kind of just turned a blind eye to what was going on. And these predators can use these types of biases. Well, he was nice to me. He didn't hurt me. Maybe he's not such a bad guy. Availability heuristic. That's what that is. He didn't hurt me personally. He was always nice to me. Maybe he's not such a bad guy. And also ostrich effect. Being Wrong by Catherine Schultz has answers. That's cool. I'll have to check that out. So we need to make sure we understand what our biases are so they're not used against us as well. And we don't want to fall victim to them. So that's where you get into a dangerous situation where you can have somebody who's manipulative and harmful can use your biases against you. So if you understand what they are, that kind of arms you against that. Now, that doesn't say that you're blamed if you're hurt because of your biases. The blame goes on the person who hurt you. But it's helpful to know what they are so you can understand yourself better and kind of protect yourself, and also not to be used by somebody who would use your biases to hurt somebody else, because that can happen too, especially with narcissistic type of personalities. But that's another chat. So seek opposing views, learn your biases, take your time in making decisions. You don't have to rush. They took the word gullible out of the dictionary. Oh goodness. And go to experts. If you're not certain about a particular thing, seek out experts or individuals who can put you in contact with them. Gaslighting. Yes, gaslighting is a common tactic by narcissists. And they prey on people with very specific biases, and they use those biases, but we can talk about that another time. So, this has been a pretty fun talk. So I'm going to show you all of these links that I've got. And I won't make you memorize them all. But if you go to my website, ScientistMel.com, I'll have these as hyperlinks in the form of a PowerPoint. You can pull up everything that I've shown you here. You can look at my notes. You can click on all of this information I have available to you on how to address your biases, how to find them, and how to keep them managed. Thank you. I'm glad you love the subject. So that's here we go, hopefully. I want to take a moment to thank my patrons. I'm on patreon.com. My patrons have allowed me to be able to up all of my tech. I'm able to get a website just for science communication. I write things on there. I have an audio podcast now because of my patrons. They have access to rewards. So Tony, Lauren, Anonymous, Mark, Jen, Carl, Melanie, Anthony, Paula, Carrie, Keith. I'm just biased. Zachary, Patrick, Tony, Graham, Tristan, Jennifer. One of the things on my Patreon account is I always thank my patrons. That's one of the things that I do every show. And they get a call out, you know, a shout out on that. They also have access to rewards, early access to my podcast. They get a week in advance. They also have original artwork, and they can get original artwork printed out and sent to them as one of the rewards. They're helpful to me, and they allow me to be able to do what I can do here. So where can you find me? Everywhere on the internet. Primarily ScientistMel.com, but my Patreon, Periscope, YouTube, Facebook. We're biased towards our contributors, of course. Well, they're kind to me, and they do help me, and they're able to help me do what I do here. But that has been the science of cognitive bias. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, you can message me on ScientistMel.com. You can find me on Twitter. Use the hashtag HeyScientistMel, because I'll wake up on any given morning and have 100 ats from people who have tagged me in conversations, and I'm trying to catch up. But if you have a question about any of my content, hashtag HeyScientistMel. You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and also my website has a contact option for email. Huge, indispensable topic. Yay! I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. So I hope you have an awesome Saturday. And if you missed this one, I will post it on YouTube, so fear not. Thank you. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. Have a good day. Bye. So today I'm going to talk about pseudoscience. I have spent some time going through lots of different things. I'm going to focus heavily on more of alternative medicine type of pseudoscience, because I feel that that is inherently dangerous for a lot of reasons. Good morning. So let's talk a little bit about what pseudoscience is, all right? Cherry picking data. Let's see. All right. Here is pseudoscience as the particular definition, if you look it up. So essentially what pseudoscience is, it's fake science. It's claimed to be scientific, but the thing is there's no evidence, and it's not constrained by the appropriate scientific methods that we would normally see with the scientific process of more reputable types of science, including those involving journals, peer review. I did a whole segment just on peer review. So if you want to kind of get more information in regards to that, I can shoot you a link about a video that I did on peer review. But pseudoscience is problematic for lots of different reasons. Now, here's the different things that we see, especially with pseudoscience, and how to kind of pick it out. Like, how do you tell if it's science or if it's fake science? Well, here's stuff for fake science. It has sensational headlines. This can cure cancer. This will reverse your autoimmune disease. This will make you detoxified and overall healthy. It'll make you younger. So these sensational headlines tend to draw you in, or the clickbait of fake science, so to speak. There's usually no control group. So when you're doing a scientific study, you need to compare to find out if something works or not. You need a control group to show what would happen if they didn't have this product, as seen on TV. They also misinterpret their results. And since there's no peer review involved in pseudoscience, they can take their results and think, well, this is the results that we wanted, and it's because of this reason. Well, it could be lots of different reasons. That's why we have peer review, to make sure you didn't make a mistake. There's usually some sort of conflict of interest. So if you're looking at a particular case, you want to see who's doing the funding. All right, conflict of interest. You know, Nestle one time funded an American Heart Association study to try to show that eating chocolate is heart healthy. Nestle funded it. Conflict of interest, you know? So, hey, so you kind of look through that and see causation, correlation. Just because the numbers match up doesn't necessarily mean one causes another. If you look at the Nicolas Cage movies that come out, there's an increased amount of pool drownings. So I don't know if that's linked to suicide because it's a Nick Cage film, or if everybody's just so excited they want to have pool parties and watch his movies. No, they have nothing to do with each other. They also cherry pick their results. They're like, well, this study didn't give us what we need. Let's toss that out. This study gave us what we needed, so we're going to pick this. And we're going to say this is our data. But they've thrown out everything else that negates everything else that they've done. That's problematic. They use speculative language. They say things like, well, it looks like this does this. It's possible that this does this. They don't have any definitive language to say, this causes this, or this made this happen. It looks like this. It seems to do this. There's nothing definitive about their studies. There's no blind testing. So if you're looking at a weight loss product, all the people know that they're taking this particular pill for weight loss, and they're like, hey, and they're like, but diet and exercise, but take this pill, it'll enhance it. But there's likely no control group at all, compared to the two. And these people know that what they're taking is supposed to give a desired effect. So they can say, oh, hey, look, I lost all of this weight taking this pill. Well, you might have just lost all that weight taking the pill because you dieted and exercised, because there's no control group, and you knew you were taking the pill that was supposed to give you this effect. The results are not reproducible. So a lot of these studies, you can say, hey, we got these results. You give it to anybody else, they're like, oh, I couldn't get the same thing. Spot on. So it's like with the Andrew Wakefield stuff. Nobody else could reproduce those results. And he came out saying he falsified that data. That's pseudoscience. And it's exceptionally irresponsible in that regard, because he was a researcher and he had a conflict of interest because he was being funded by a particular group to try to prove that another group had vaccines that cause autism. All right. Also, a tiny sample size. If there's we had 20 individuals and 12 of them had this result. How would a Nestle company, for instance, have a legit study done if they don't pay for it? Well, if you want a study done, all right, you would need to, have several, I would say, have several different groups take a look at it, and have an outside group, again, with the peer review thing. I don't think this was actually published anywhere. I can double check on that particular study. I don't think it was published in a journal. It was just featured by the American Heart Association. And there are some links to particular things within chocolate that are flavonoids, but you can also find that in wine. Now, that doesn't mean go and eat a giant chocolate bar. Independent studies, yes, outside of a particular, group. So there's a lot of problem with some of the sciences, but it's important that you look at these conflicts of interest in order to figure out, okay, where are they getting the money? Was it an independent study? Was it just this group, or did several groups have a look? So that's another thing you can do to kind of get that. Now, the tiny sample size, if you have 20 people in your study and 12 of them gave you the desired result, you're like, the majority of our particular group gave us the desired result. It's tiny. That's so insignificant. Even if it's 100 people and you're like, 85 people had the results that we wanted out of 100, you can't. 85% of 100 people does not equate to millions. So you can't rule that out. So look at the sample size. And if there are no publications in any peer-reviewed journals, you're likely looking at some pseudoscience. If it's just a book somebody wrote on wellness, that's not subjected to peer review. That's just a personal opinion piece. And I did this stuff here, and I read these things, and these are my thoughts about it. That's just a standard book. It's not a textbook. If it's not a textbook, just throw it out. If it's not a publication in a journal, a good, established journal, what's the best sample size? It depends on what the study is. So the larger the sample size, the more likely you can equate it to a larger population. Like Jeff Sessions investigating Trump, not independent. All right. So what's the problem with pseudoscience? It's got a history throughout time. If you've ever watched A Million Ways to Die in the West, they touch a little bit on pseudoscience with a snake oil at the fair kind of thing. It's a pretty funny film. So this snake oil cures all. It's not a valid science. It can promote panic. You could sit there and say, oh my gosh, I have toxins in me.
Dihydrogen monoxide. It's overused by athletes. You know, it promotes a type of panic. Oh, it's okay. So, you know, you got this type of this panic stuff that's going on. People think that there's something wrong with them, and they're like, oh my gosh, you know, I've got this happening to me. I've got these toxins in me. I got to get rid of. You got a liver. It already does that. And people have lived a long time not detoxifying themselves. It gives false hope as well. So if you're dealing with particular, you know, patients with this type of disease and they're not getting results right away from their medical care provider, this can give them false hope in thinking that if I take this herbal remedy, my cancer will go away, my autoimmune disease will stop. That's not true. It's misinformation, and this is dangerous. Goop does that. I'm going to talk about Goop today because they have really gotten on my ragey buttons. You know, what's good snake? What's a good snake to use for effective snake oil? I don't know. That sounds like a scientific study to me. So, but it's dangerous because a lot of people may forego their medical treatment in order to pursue these types of herbal remedies that have absolutely no basis in anything. So, one of my favorite lines from The Princess Bride is, you know, he says, "Life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something." That's absolutely true. The goal of pseudoscience is for profit. It's not for wellness because they're not held to scientific standards. They're there to make money. And that's what it is. The ultimate goal is not wellness because a lot of the times, and I'm going to talk about the FDA and what they do, they're there to get money. They're there to make money, and they make a lot of money, in fact. Let's talk about that versus the myth of Big Pharma. Yes, Big Pharma's goal is profit. It is. It's profit, just like alternative medicine. But the goal is effective treatments because pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies have to meet scientific standards in order for them to be used to treat, cure any particular disease or any type of defect. They are held to those standards. That's where it's different from pseudoscience. They're not held to the scrutiny of other scientific experts. So let's talk about the figures here. Alternative medicine just in the U.S. makes $34 billion annually. $60 billion goes to weight loss. So these are massive freaking industries that make all kinds of money based on, hey, don't trust medical science, and if you don't have insurance, that's okay. Come over our way. We'll give you stuff that may or may not help. Results not typical, but that's what they say, and that's how they're able to make a lot of money off of this. Now, according to some things that I've read, on Smithsonian has a great article, I can link you to that. As far as alternative medicine, only a third of the products are actually tested, and they don't have to be FDA approved, which means there's no guarantee that they even work, and that's due to a law that was passed in 1994, and I'm going to talk about that. Now, I'm basing a lot of this on U.S. knowledge, as the fact is that I'm based in the U.S. and I have more information available to me in regards to the practices here, so that's where I'm going to be focusing on this. Let's talk about the FDA. What do? Why do we need them? So they're here to ensure that products are safe. Actually, a snake called oily snake in East India is very poisonous with the snake oil. So let's talk about the FDA. They usually spend about 6 months investigating a particular device or drug. They go through and check all of the studies, and they do independent studies to make certain that it's proven to be effective, that it's safe, and the fact is it can't be marketed or sold otherwise to treat or cure any type of diseases until it meets these standards. Now, the FDA does take a look at alternative medicine, but they only really categorize it. They don't claim that it works. They don't check for its safety. They don't do any of that. They can do recalls, and I'm going to talk about some very scary recalls that the FDA has done. they actually do get involved with alternative medicine when it comes to fraud. Now, fraud is a big, big problem in this regard because of the fact that if they claim, now here's the thing, if an alternative medicine claims that it can cure a disease, then it has to be categorized as a drug, and then it's subjected. It is then subjected to all of the different investigations. Now, the FDA does not guarantee that it works, that anything works beyond nutritional and aesthetics. They only try to make certain that it doesn't cause damage unless it's like a medical device. You know, if it cures a disease or treats a particular disease, that's when it falls under the drugs. Anything else, it's fair game, and it can have all kinds of harmful things. So let's talk a little bit about these particular recalls. These recalls are actually kind of scary. So Zicam. Let me switch to a different, I gotta pull this up. Woo! Sorry, it's gone black. Ah, there we go. So let's talk about Zicam. Zicam. Many people state that the loss of sense of smell occurred within the first dose of the Zicam product, although some people report it happened after later doses. The loss of sense of smell may be long-lasting or even permanent in some people. So what exactly does this mean? This means that Zicam, when it was used to kind of stop the flu, when it was used, you know, for colds, it caused people to actually lose their sense of smell permanently. This wasn't just some small amount of damage. People can't smell anymore because of Zicam. So, and your sense of smell is kind of important. So, the FDA is not bound by the law to ensure that a product is safe before they use it. Now let's talk about this thing. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Highland teething. It is scary. Now they'll market it for weight loss. Yeah, don't shove things in your nose. Just eat this Zicam swab. So let's talk about the Highland teething. Also, sense of smell, food tastes weird, right? Yes, it does. Oh my gosh. So this particular product would help aid babies who were teething and had that pain. All right. So it's not, it was a homeopathic remedy. And it's Highland teething tablets. This particular thing contains belladonna, also known as nightshade. Now, if you're familiar with movies or any type of history, you know that nightshade is a poison that's been used, you know, to poison people. They put this in teething tablets. So people gave this to their babies. All right, it's extremely toxic, and it's found in the berries and in the plants. But it's been used as a poison and a medicine throughout history, but it's primarily toxic. So there was a big recall on this because people were giving this to their children. So their babies, con suppressant. Ugh, God, man. Yeah, it's really scary. Let's talk about Ayurveda. So the FDA has a lot of information on their website about Ayurveda medicine. CNS, sorry. Oh, okay. So in accordance with current law, the FDA does not evaluate these products, or any products actually, before they are marketed. This means their safety, quality, and effectiveness cannot be assured by the FDA. Now, Ayurveda has heavy metals, which can be toxic for certain populations. So essentially, let's talk about this. These heavy metals have been found to accumulate in various organs. They can cause problems with your heart, your brain, your kidneys, your bone, your liver, all kinds of major types of organs of your body. They hinder biological function, and now it is impossible to live in an environment free of heavy metals. If it's in small doses, it's not that big of a deal, but you want to limit your exposure to these toxins. Ayurveda has all kinds of heavy metals in it that can actually cause a lot of problems for you. So the FDA has a very, very strong stance on where they sit on Ayurveda, but they can still be marketed in the U.S. A lot of these products can, but until it shows a distinct population-wide issue, they can't do recall like they could with Zicam, where it causes permanent loss of smell. So we're going to get into a few other things. So let's hop over to here. They can accumulate, but it's not, you know, we get some exposure to heavy metals, but you know, your body does tend to break some things down. I can look up a bit more on what the lethal doses are and what the biological processes are of eliminating heavy metals from your body. Let me do a little bit of research on that so I can get you the correct information before I comment. So I want to make sure I do that. So no problem. So let's talk about dietary supplements. There was a law passed in 1994 called the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act. That's DSHEA. It essentially classified dietary supplements as food. And since it's classified as food, this prevents the FDA from regulating them as strictly as drugs in regards to their efficacy, safety, and marketing claims. So if it's classified as a food item and it doesn't do any particular harm to you, the FDA has got their hands tied. So they're like, okay, you guys can have these weight loss drugs, you can have these weight loss supplements. Notice they don't say drugs, they don't say it cures obesity, it doesn't cure anything. It's just an additive to your food. So where it actually matters is labeling. Labeling is everything. So a labeling of a supplement is not permitted to treat a particular disease or a condition. So the marketing statements that suggest an effect on the structure or the function of the body are allowed. So you say, be more alert, feel better all over. You know, a generalized sweeping statements are allowed as long as there's no specific claim for a particular disease or a condition. So let's talk a little bit about Goop. They've made me a bit ragey. I actually went through their site quite a bit. I spent a little while picking apart some of their supplements and the things that they provide. Now, Goop is represented by a celebrity named Gwyneth Paltrow. She's been in the news a lot lately, and she's actually said that she thinks criticism, I'm not the only one. Yeah, I'm sure I'm not. I've been reading more about it. So she says that criticism from scientists is dangerous. She also says bee stings aren't so bad. Well, if you're allergic to bee stings, they're pretty bad. And she says to shove these jade eggs in your vagina and detoxify your vagina. You have a natural pH for that, and your liver detoxifies everything, so don't put rocks in your lady bits. That's just not a good idea. She also steams it with like heat. And she also says there's certain herbs. I might be incorrect on this, so if I am, I'll happily correct the statement. They put roots and herbs in your lady bits, and I'm going, no, but okay. So that's Goop. Okay, they have their whole lady stuff section, and then they have supplements. So I'm gonna you wouldn't put that near your man bits. So let's talk about these supplements. They have cute little things that say, why am I so effing tired? Gee golly whiz. So you can go and subscribe. It's $90 a month if you just buy their supplements one time. Or it's $75 a month if you subscribe to them. All right, I looked through the ingredients, and I won't make you read everything, but I've got them and I'm going to post them for you. Everyone's tired. Everyone needs a pill. So if you go to Walgreens, you can get the same type of stuff for $12 for 100 tablets. And they have fancy words here that just are stuff that you find in salad, fish, and standard vitamins. So let's look a little bit at why am I so effing tired? So here, let me switch to this one. Now, I'm not going to make you read this entire label, but I'm going to kind of go through just for a second. All they have here are just standard vitamins that you would normally see with any particular brand of vitamin. Now, they have an excessive amount of D, calcium, niacin, thiamine, vitamin B12, and riboflavin. Now, you will pee these out of your system if your body doesn't need it. However, if you do have too much of the water-soluble vitamins, there are problems that can be associated with that, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Now, the only ones that will actually be stored in your body are vitamins A, D, E, and K. So, I have one more. I have one more to show you in regards to goop. Let me show you this. This here has phytoblend multivitamins, omega-3s, and they have these adaptogen blends and licorice root. So they have all of these things. Phyto means plants. So if you eat salad, you're going to get a lot of that. Or if you eat vegetables, you're going to get a lot of that. Omega-3 you get from fish and gelatin. Kind of easy there. Also, olive oil. So if you eat with olive oil, you're going to get that. There's herbs that they have listed here that are not even tested for effectiveness. They have other words called microcrystalline cellulose. Guess what makes up plant cell walls? Cellulose. Eat some vegetables. Don't pay them $75 for this. Licorice root, diuretic, olive oil. So this is just kind of crazy. So I went on Walgreens website. All right, you can go on Walgreens.com and get you some Centrum Silver for women 50 plus. I just snagged one. Notice it's $12 and there's a sale right now. Buy one, get one half off. So if you happen to be particularly deficient in regards to your vitamins, which you should check with your doctor if you are, you can get the same thing here. So let's have a look at what that is. So they have much of the same vitamins as you would find on any of the Goop supplements. I do all my research by web. I need to get out more. I go to the store and stuff, but I don't want to like have to pick it up. It's faster to go this way, and you know, diuretic and olive oil. So you can get a lot more information quickly, and I know where to look on the internet to find the reputable sources. So we have a lot of the same stuff here that you would find in that particular one. So I needed to tell you though, use vitamins if they're doctor recommended. I mean, and your doctor's going to prescribe vitamins to you if they think you need it. For instance, prenatal vitamins and that sort of thing. So unless you're particularly deficient, your doctor is not going to prescribe you iron or anything else, or prescribe you any of these particular vitamins unless they feel that you need it. Yes, there's a doctor there. It's a picture. It's not a real one, I'm afraid. And too many vitamins are bad. So certain water-soluble vitamins in excess can cause nerve problems, like too much vitamin B6 can cause nerve problems, too much niacin can cause flushing, and excessive vitamin C can cause kidney stones. So if you're taking a lot of vitamins, you might be doing more harm than good. Just get your vitamins from food, and if you have a particularly malnourished diet, your doctor's going to tell you what to take. Vitamin D is toxic. Any idea if melatonin has any benefits? I'm not certain right off, but let me look. I'm making notes. If I forget and you ask me something that I don't have the answer to right away, hit me up on Twitter and I'll find answers for you quickly. All right, so I'm going to hit Goop a bit more. Look at this particular title. A simple cure for autoimmune disease? This angered me. I'm going to be honest. This entire section, and you can go on their website and you can look at it, this angered me because I know people who suffer autoimmune diseases, and if it was just as easy as changing your diet, don't you think they would have done that? And it's not. It doesn't necessarily claim to cure autoimmune disease. It has incorrect info in this particular article, and it's a sensationalized headline. Do I know anything about CLL? I'm not certain what CLL is. You'll have to send me information as what it is, and I can find out for you and get back to you on that. But I will. I do want to answer your questions. I don't know everything all the time, but I do know how to get reputable information and from good sources, and I can link you to that on Twitter when I get a chance. I looked into this, though. Oh, my God. No problem. Happy to help. So let's look at this. This made me kind of mad. So let me switch over to here. This is a quote from their site, and it says, since bacterial and viral genes make up 99% of our combined genes, yes, you are only 1% human by genetic code and 90% human by actual cell count, everything that happens to us starts in the gut. This is based on the myth that you have more bacterial cells than you do actual human cells. Goop is incorrect. Nature came out and talked about this particular study, and I have the link at the bottom, and I can send you that as well. This came out in 2016, and this was based on the idea that they based it on the count of bacteria within the colon, and they thought that that would carry through the small intestine all the way up through the esophagus, but they weren't taking into consideration that there are not so much bacteria in the small intestine and in this esophagus. It was taking into account the entire digestive system based on what was found in just the colon. That's problematic. So that particular myth that's been decades old, and that's the thing about science. Science will come out and say, hey, we were incorrect about this. We don't have as many bacterial cells in our body as we do human cells. Here's why. It was on the idea that amount carried through the small intestine all the way up through the esophagus. Is that why Einstein has his tongue? I love that picture. But, so that particular myth was debunked. And Goop is incorrect in that regard. And they're trying to say that you have to have a certain amount of bacteria in your colon or in, your digestive tract in order to function as a person. And that's why autoimmune diseases happen to people, is they have a wrong amount in there. That's dangerous. That is dangerous because it's inaccurate and it's not true. There are some particular autoimmune type of diseases that are associated with gut bacteria. Just by eliminating certain foods, it's reversed or taken care of, but that's not across the board in everything. It just uses the keyword that sparks interest without the real science behind it. That's true. That's exactly right. So let's look at another thing that they say that makes me quite ragey and angry. This shows a complete and total lack of understanding basic pharmacy, all right? Basic pharmacy knowledge, all right? The supplements, I had been using many of them in the lab. Now, this is I should tell you, this is the medical doctor they have, the single medical doctor they have that's supporting Goop. He is basing everything on his personal observations, which are not verified at all. So let's read this. The supplements, I had been using them, many of them, in the lab intravenously to help hearts stay alive for 48 hours for transplant, or to even bring dead hearts back to life after an hour in a dead body. I was giving these compounds intravenously, but it never occurred to me to swallow them, because you can't swallow IV meds. You can't do that. This is basic pharmacy science. IV meds and supplements have 100% bioavailability. Oral supplements undergo metabolism in the liver. Goop has no substantiation to this claim, and there are no journal articles cited. Gwyneth Frankenstein. So this particular medical doctor, who is a cardiac cardiac doctor who, you know, pumped your heart, you know, swapped it out for another one, might go through and work with your veins, is claiming to know something about autoimmune diseases. No, first. Secondly, you cannot swallow intravenous anything because it's 100% bioavailability. So what that means is when you get an IV drug, it's also been shown that neurosurgeons are idiots too, i.e. presidential candidates. So when you get an IV drug, that means it bypasses your liver altogether and it is 100% available for your body to use. Oral supplements or oral drugs have to undergo conversion in the liver. Now, the liver is going to break it down into different products, and there's no guarantee that it'll even work if you take an IV mint drug and then it processes in your liver. It might break it down into compounds that are harmful or useless. So, oral availability of drugs and intravenous drugs, they have to pass through certain metabolic processes in order for them to work. So he's going through, there are no journal articles cited on this particular site. There's no substantiation to this claim that he was able to inject a dead heart with supplements and vitamins to make it come back to life again after it had been in a body for an hour. There was this one time I did this one thing, hold my beer. I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. It doesn't sound at all like anything that's substantiated or there's any proof of. This next one made me really, really angry. So let me show you this one. Oh boy. So this one's not the one that was the most ragey for me. A heart brought back to life, is that even possible? If it's been in a body for an hour and frozen, you know, possibly. It could possibly be just fine, but, you know, what are you going to talk about? What is dead and what is not? So it's absolutely ridiculous. Nerium anti-aging is made from poisonous oleander plant, causes skin to swell and wrinkles smooth out. Maybe the cells. Yes. So let's look at this one. There's a Q&A section on the same site about autoimmune diseases. What are the biggest diet culprits and contributing factors to autoimmune diseases? Okay, hold up here. Love it. Okay, so he says some of the biggest dietary pitfalls often involve eating so-called healthy foods that humans were never designed to eat. As hard as it is to believe, plants do not want to be eaten. They were here first. Where do you think we get our food, Mr. MD cardiologist? We get all of our food from plants. If you eat a cow eats plants. I mean, they protect themselves and their seeds by putting proteins in their leaves and seeds called lectins. Gluten is by far the most famous lectin, but what most people don't know is that it's quite a minor one. Seeing me, quite a minor one. I mean, difference always put up a fight before getting eaten. And that most gluten-free substitutes have far worse lectins. Half of my patients with autoimmune disease avoid gluten before seeing me, but did not fully improve until I removed other lectins from their diet. Quinoa, corn, beans, and nightshades like potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and others are loaded with lectins. The CDC states that 20 to 30% of all cases of food poisoning in the U.S. occur from lectins in undercooked beans, and plants simply do not want their seeds to be eaten. Cooking beans diminishes the amount of lectin, though some remains. Okay, I truly have no words for this nonsense. I looked up at the CDC. I couldn't find the statistic at all. I spent a lot of time combing the CDC trying to find all of these poisonous and awful plants that are associated with food poisoning. 75% of food poisoning is associated with bacterial type of problems. Salmonella, botulism, this sort of thing. That would leave about 25% associated possibly with plants. It's so insignificant that I tried to find on the CDC stat involved with this, and I just can't. Cutting gluten from my diet completely relieved your celiac symptoms, so that's wrong. Now, celiac disease is something else. Celiac is associated with gluten, you know, so it is associated with gluten intake, and you're told by your doctor to do that. Maybe he talked to the night janitor at the CDC. And so the poisons that I look for in association with the plants are parts of plants that we don't eat anyway. So I don't see anybody going out and getting poison ivy. Nobody's really eating oleander, white oleander. I mean, nobody's really making that part of their diet. And so I really find it problematic. I couldn't find any stats that he said that were associated with that in regards to plants not wanting to be eaten, because everything that we eat is associated with plant energy. Cows, they eat grass. If you eat a cow, you're eating plant food as well. Chickens, same thing. They eat corn. So even if you're a carnivore exclusively, you're still going to get energy from primarily a plant source. So it's absolutely ridiculous, because they want to hide the truth. They do want to hide the truth. So let's look at this last particular one. This got me where I was really ragey. This is the most dangerous thing about goop. Which autoimmune diseases are the most responsive to diet changes? What do you recommend? This was a question posed to them, and this is on their site. So he says, this medical doctor that's a cardiologist and doesn't really work with autoimmune diseases, said that it cannot be cured or put into remission by simple dietary changes and supplementation. So he starts with that, all right? He starts with that. And then he goes, in October of 2016, I presented a paper at the Pasteur Institute in Paris showing 78 patients with autoimmune diseases like lupus, Crohn's, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, and colitis, who were cured by these manipulations. Autoimmune diseases come from the gut and is cured in the gut. If you have an autoimmune disease, treat your gut and the disease will subside. Well, it depends entirely on the autoimmune disease and if it's associated with digestion. If it's not, then it's not going to do anything. Notice he puts the disease in quotes, and he eliminates any particular personal responsibility by saying, you know, he has yet to see any autoimmune disease that cannot be cured or put into remission by simple dietary changes and supplementation. This is all a very subjective statement, and it can be taken out two different ways. Either he thinks it can be cured by this, or he's relieving himself of responsibility. Yes, he doesn't say that. And so there is no link to his published paper. It's not even published. There's no evidence. He eliminates all of responsibility for himself to say this. Now, he might be loosely basing it on a particular paper that was published in regards to the Western diet. The Western diet being, and I put that in quotes because that's what they do in the paper, high fats, cholesterol, excessive sugar, and salt intake has been shown to contribute to obesity, diabetes, cancer, heart problems, and there may be a link now to autoimmune diseases, but that's preventative. You have a genetic predisposition for certain diseases, and there are environmental factors that can trigger an onset of it, including autoimmune diseases, but there's nothing substantial that shows that changing your diet can reverse these diseases unless they are associated with a dietary, autoimmune type of problem, like celiac, like Crohn's, like IBS. Even IBS really isn't autoimmune, but there's certain diseases that are associated with your gastrointestinal system. By changing your diet, subsides the symptoms, but it doesn't eradicate the disease fully. It just doesn't. And so this really makes me angry because of the fact that it's irresponsible. It's saying if you change your way you eat, you're going to get rid of your autoimmune disease and everything's going to be fine. And it just is wrong. There are some other companies that do that with cancer. If you just change your diet, well, if you change your diet, you're going to feel better anyway. If you exercise, you're going to feel better anyway. That's just how it is, because you're changing the nutrition that you're putting into your body, and you're making stuff available to it that it hasn't had before, and you're cutting out excessive amounts of anything else that has been linked to diseases. So this is a problem with that. So let me get to the next one here. here we go. So, let's talk, kind of wrap everything up a bit with pseudoscience. Goop is absolutely irresponsible. They're wrong. They're just flat out wrong. They're manipulative, and they're taking people's money, preying on fears and hopes that since medical science doesn't seem to cure autoimmune disease yet, look at them, it promotes a distrust. So, it's harmful because of the fact that people may forego medical treatment in the fact that it's not being as effective as they'd like. It gives false hope, it preys on their fears, and it generates distrust of real science. So when you look at this here, coconut oil cures everything, but Big Pharma doesn't want you to know about that. Eating fruit and vegetables will ward off the flu. Homeopathy, more effective than conventional medicine. But these statements are not, are not like investigated by the FDA. Shh, and results not typical. I mean, and then you've got other things. Bill Gates is depopulating the earth through eugenics programs. I mean, so you've got a lot of different things here that are problematic that promote a distrust in science, which is counterproductive, especially with everything that it takes to go through just to get a particular item published or to get a particular treatment published or used. So let's kind of wrap up things. I'm so angry at Goop. I'm trying to be not super angry with Goop. Oh, okay, you gotta go. Thanks for hopping on. So, pseudoscience. They claim to be scientific. There's no evidence for anything. The main goal is profit. They want to make money. If they didn't want to make money, it wouldn't be so freaking expensive. It'd be cheaper than your normal drugs that you would get for, in U.S. side. It would be cheaper if it wasn't just for money. There's the goal is profit, and it's not constrained by appropriate scientific method. It's just not there. The science isn't there. The data isn't there. There's no peer review. There's no FDA regulations. They can say whatever they want as long as they're not trying to cure a disease. They use disease with quotes, it's like, that's what they call it. That's not really what we're doing here. So that's kind of what they do. So that has been the science of pseudoscience based on primarily alternative medicine. Unchecked greed is dangerous. It is. It is absolutely dangerous. First time catching me live. Woohoo! So I need to take a moment and thank my patrons. I also need to add Tony with a Y. So I need to say you love the scope. Sweet. So I need to add Tony with a Y, as well as Tony here. There's a person who wants to remain anonymous, Jen, Carl, and Patrick. They are patrons on my Patreon account. My Patreon starts at $1 a month. And if you have $1, it helps me be able to up my the quality of my scopes. And I'm going to have a podcast soon, an audio podcast, and I'm working on ScientistMel.com to where you'll be able to gain access to everything at one particular place and make it a bit easier for you. So I'm ScientistMel everywhere except YouTube. They wouldn't give it to me. I have ScientistMel there. You can find me on Facebook. I'm finished already. Did you hop on last? Maybe put the link. It is in my bio on Twitter. The link is on my bio on Twitter, patreon.com/ScientistMel. Great talk. Yay! So, that has been the science of pseudoscience. I will happily send you any and all of the information that I used for this particular talk. And if you want any further information, you can use the hashtag HeyScientistMel. I check it every day. I get a lot of mentions on Twitter in my ads. And so if you use that hashtag, then I'm able to find those questions a lot sooner. And I'll be posting this particular one on YouTube. If you're a YouTuber as opposed to a Periscoper, you'll be able to find the higher quality productions there as well. Oh, it's not linked in the Periscope bio. Okay, I will fix that then. All right, and thank you again for hopping aboard. I hope you've enjoyed the science of pseudoscience. This was a much longer talk than I normally do. Normally they're about 30-45 minutes. This has been an hour, but that's okay. It was a good talk, excellent talk, yay! I'm so glad you guys liked it. You're welcome. And so again, if you have any questions, hit me up on Twitter. And I'm glad this was informative. Look for FDA approved things, please. Otherwise, you could just be giving poison to people, because that's happened, and you might lose a sense like smell. So, feel so soon. Maybe time for another nature walk to derage. Yes, nature walks are great. Okay. Well, you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you on Twitter. Thanks for stopping by. Bye. Hello. I'm still connecting, it seems, to a couple of things. So hopefully this is going to work out. I'm waiting for it to connect on YouTube. Seems YouTube is a bit buggy sometimes, and it doesn't like to cooperate so well. So Periscope is live. And it's still connecting. Okay. It looks like I'm on YouTube. Let me see. And it's still connecting. Okay. Alright, so it looks like I'm on YouTube. Let me double check Periscope before I get started and make sure it's on. It still says connecting on YouTube stream. So, yep, and it seems I'm on live on Periscope. Alright, so let me pull up the chat so I can kind of see who's there. You'll have to forgive me. I'm running this simultaneously on YouTube and Periscope at the same time, and this is the first time I've done an actual show where I'm doing that. So, and it seemed to work pretty well yesterday for the most part. So we're going to kind of see how this goes in regards to everything else. So if you want to say hello, feel free. I have my chat up, so I'll be able to talk to you between the four. So I'm on Twitter, Periscope, all clear. Fantastic. So, hello everyone. Let me double check on YouTube really quickly and see how that's looking. Are we still going? At the same time, and this is the first time I've done an actual show where yes, I'm on YouTube. Yay! So, okay. And it's so apologies for that. So I have the sound off now. Hello, everyone. Hello. I'm sorry. I'm still coughing a bit, but I'm gonna get over it. Hello. Yay! Godless Journey's there, and Charlie. I've got you all in one place. so I can talk to you on Periscope and Twitter at the same time. Yay! You see me. Okay, fantastic. Sorry. So, if you're new to this sort of format, what I essentially do is I put a topic up for people to vote on, and then they pick what it is that I talk about. I've been going back through old episodes because I used to stream like right off my phone, and back in March, April-ish, around there. So this originally started with me streaming off of my phone, where I like literally wrote out slides and held up papers and stuff while I was talking. But with the advancement of technology and my knowledge of it, I'm able to go back and redo some episodes. So last week I talked about cannabis. The week before that I covered flat earthers. And this week I'm going back and doing my very first episode, which is on the scientific method. And so, woohoo, in the newer format, and I have some new intros to show you that Gonna Go For It on Twitter has made for me. So, how about we go ahead and talk about the science of the scientific method, and let's get started. Isn't that an awesome intro? Woohoo! I'm so excited, and I'm glad I get to be here with you today. So today we are going to talk about the scientific method. Yeah, I thought it was a great intro too. So essentially what I'm going to go through is I'm going to talk about what is it? All right, so what is the scientific method? It is a problem-solving process that scientists use, and it is easy. It's an easy form to follow. And why is it effective? It's because it's repeatable and always gives answers. Even if the answers are what you're looking for or not, the scientific method is always going to give you results. And so you can kind of take that in and go back and redo if you need to. And yes, anyone can use this method, and I highly recommend anyone use this method. It's actually quite important, and it's very, very useful. So what is the scientific method? Well, we have observe. So essentially we're looking at something, we're looking at a particular thing, and then we question, and we're like, why is this thing happening? We see this thing, we know it's there, but we want to know why or how it's happening. And so then we generate a hypothesis. That's like an answer on trial. To kind of like, is this the answer to this question that we're looking for? Then we undergo an experiment to test to see if that's the right answer. And then we get our results. And then we go, okay, so this is what we got. Is it the right answer? Yes or no? And that's what our conclusion is. So let's talk a minute about what a hypothesis is and what the scientific method uses. It uses what we call if-then logic. So if a particular thing happens, if we do a particular thing, then this thing is going to happen. That's that if-then logic we're talking about. A hypothesis is a tentative answer to a well-framed question. So you might say, okay, why? I'm looking at things and I notice that they fall on the ground when people let go. Why is it that when I let go of this ball, it hits the ground? That's your question. Your hypothesis is gravity. So a hypothesis is a tentative answer. It's an answer on trial, and the experiment is the trial. We get our data, that's our results, and then we conclude at the end of that, did it answer our question? So we kind of use deductive reasoning, and that flows from general, like a general type of analysis, to a highly specific. So we start out with, we see this thing happen, and then why does it happen? We think it's this answer, and then we experiment, and then we rule out all kinds of other factors. That's how we go from a general aspect to highly specific. Now, a hypothesis gains credibility by surviving attempts to falsify it.
So that's one of those things that scientists are constantly doing. Hello, hello. I'm talking to people on Periscope and YouTube. It's wonderful. It's like it's Christmas today. So what I want to do a little bit is kind of explain how this particular method is effective, what we use it for, and all of that. So I want to take a moment to essentially talk to you about law, hypothesis, theory, and fact. Hello, because this is often confused. It's often confused between the two. And I encounter that often. But the thing is, it's regularly confused. So let's talk about what a law is. A law is a fact, a cause and effect relationship between two elements that always happens the same way under certain conditions. Now, in some cases, it happens differently in other conditions, but that's all right. It's still a law. So when we say it happens in one particular, and what it happens a certain way under certain conditions with or without gravity, okay, we can kind of look at that. We know that it can behave and it always does the same thing, whether it's within a gravity type of situation or it's out of gravity. Bodies in motion remain in motion unless they're affected on by an outside force. So we can have stipulations and exceptions within those laws, and that's okay. So that's what a law is, all right? That's what a law is. So a hypothesis is that if-then statement. So if I get this canine dog here, if I get this dog and let go, then he's going to hit the ground, all right? So that's that if-then statement, and it's because of gravity. So it kind of follows through that. If I do this, then this will happen. It will fall towards the ground. So you can test that and find out that your hypothesis is true. Look, hey, look at that. It happens every time. So that's kind of your hypothesis. Now the fact. A fact is evidence, data, and results. The ball or my canine dog from Warner Brothers Studio store, okay, either drops or it doesn't. I mean, it's that simple. It's either going to drop and hit the floor or it's not, you know, and it's gonna, and my knee blocked it, so that's an outside force that got in the way. So that's not gonna change. So even if this didn't drop, I'm doing great, thank you. So even if this didn't drop and hit the ground and started floating around, that's still a result, and it's still an answer, and it still happened. So even if your data is not what you want, it's still a fact. So even if you get those unusual results from an experiment, they are still facts, which means you need to figure out why these results happen this way. Could be a human error or something else is affecting your result. All right, thanks for the moral support, guys. So let's talk about theory. Theory is an explanation that is broad, and it generates new hypotheses, new ideas, and is supported by a large body of evidence. It is supported by facts. It is supported by laws. Gravity is a theory, but is an explanation as to why things hit the ground when we let go of them. It's not this hit the ground. That's a fact. Gravity is the explanation as to why it happens. Laws do not tell us why something happens. They just state that they do. Theories tell why something happens. So it's based on laws, facts, and we put them all together and we have an explanation. That's what a theory is. And people get this confused so often. But that's okay. That's why we're here to kind of sort this out. So that we completely understand theory, let's address the facts. All right? And I want to make sure we got this solid, you know. So gravity is a theory. It explains why things hit the ground when they do. Newton's laws discuss the math behind a singular fact regarding movement, one fact at a time. Yes, hello. Yeah, I'm going to talk about It's Just a Theory in just a second, Wesley. So that's awesome that you said that. Hello, Beach Price. Hello, everyone. Hey, Randall. So, when we say Newton's laws discuss the math behind a singular fact, it's not a whole bunch of stuff together. It's like bodies in motion stay in motion unless acted on by an outside force. This states the relationship between movement and something affecting it. But it doesn't tell why this happens, all right? It says that this happens, period. We know this happens, this is a fact, but we don't know why. Gravity explains why bodies in motion can change via a force. And it also discusses how mass and gravity are linked. Many facts build up a theory and not just one. So when you say, there's a theory here, it's not just a single fact that's supporting it. You have a whole lot of different laws and facts that support it. Relativity theory describes how mass affects space-time. Yes. And so we have theories that have various types of evidence that are facts that support it. Now, evolution. Evolution is a theory based in many substantial facts. We know for a fact that things change over time. That's a fact, all right? We know things change genetically and they change physically. Those are facts. We see it all the time. We know things change over time. Many different facts show that things change over time, but those facts don't state why. Evolution does. Evolution discusses why things change over time. Hello, everyone. Hello. Hello, Dave. Hello, Gina. I think it's Gina or Gaini. I'm sorry if I say your name wrong. I'm terrible at pronouncing names, and that is my fault. All right, so evolution discusses why things change over time. Why do we see these physical changes and genetic changes? We know they happen. Hello, Opal. Hello, John. We know they happen, but why? Natural selection. Natural selection is an embodiment of evidence showing that the environment, population genetics, mating, mutation, natural disasters affect what changes. That's why it happens. We have all of these different things affecting the genetics, and the genetics in turn affects how things physically change. So evolution explains why we see these changes, but these changes happen, and that's real. Evolution is a theory, but it's based in facts and in laws. And those are the differences between law, hypothesis, fact, and theory. So now that we've got that down, because so many people get that confused, and I'm just like, man, let's get this sorted. Well, most skeptics of science define facts different than science. They think facts can't change. Well, facts don't change. Laws can change, though. So in regards to laws, we can amend. We can say that there's exception to the rules. And so that brings me to this. The scientific method reinforces or debunks theories, reinforces or changes laws, and it reinforces or eliminates hypotheses. So the thing is this, you can still have, yes, this is it, no, maybe, oh, but you can change laws a little bit. And that's whenever we get new evidence. And so the fact remains that anytime we see a change, or anytime we get new evidence, we can reinforce a theory, we can debunk a theory, we can amend laws a little bit, we can eliminate hypotheses. The craziest statement I have got thrown at me was that evolution can't be true because we have two sexes. Yeah, that's somebody who doesn't have a fundamental understanding of genetics.
And that's a common thing. That's something that I have seen often. All right. And it's not easily kind of contended with, because genetics is a pretty heavy subject, but fortunately we have psychomers that can sit there and kind of explain it simply. And I try to keep it as simple as possible, but sometimes people, and I find especially with those who kind of fall for the bad science, people who hear more sciencey sounding words tend to think that it means it's correct. That's not always the case. Oftentimes we encounter people who believe sciencey sounding words, they don't have the literacy to understand that it's wrong, but that's what they tend to believe. So if you explain something simply, sometimes people don't believe it because it doesn't sound smart. So sometimes that's kind of hard to counter that every once in a while. And so I'll throw out sciencey sounding words from time to time, and then people will be like, okay, she does know what she's talking about. And then I'll explain it simply and go, well, it can't be that simple. That's just too easy. And so I do run into that from time to time. So let's talk about what Wesley brought up here a second ago. It's just a theory. Sorry, hello. It's just a theory. And that makes me nuts. I have to throw out a Doctor Who what with that sometimes. Oh yes, they also confuse evolution with what Nazis did with the eugenics program. See, that's the thing. Science in itself isn't evil, but people can use it for evil things. And I talk about often, especially in my audio podcasts, about how science is misused to push bigotry. You can misuse a thing, and you can use it to do awful things, and you can use it to push bad agendas. That's what bad science does all the time. They'll hide under the guise of science and push something that's inherently awful, and misrepresent it and misuse it, and even kind of misrepresent data and say, this is the data, so that's what this means. And everybody else is like, no, that's not what it means. Penicillin is effective, but let's see, penicillin is still effective, but only on specific strains of bacteria. Bacteria changes in genetic code, and it becomes less effective, but that doesn't mean penicillin was never effective. You articulate these things much better than Bill Nye and other mainstream. Thanks for not being that. Oh, sorry. Well, thank you. Yeah, and I hate the just a theory bit. Yeah, and what it does to me is it belittles a lot of the evidence. It shows that people, it's condescending, yes. It's condescending, and it makes me say, what? And then I rant a little bit. So it gets a bit frustrating for me from time to time when I hear that, because having been a scientist and done research, I'm just like, you have no idea how much effort and time and study goes into a particular thing. So it really, really bugs me when people say, it's just a theory. And I'm like, but you don't know what you're talking about. And so that's when I go through and say the massive amount of evidence and facts that go into developing a theory and explaining why something we know happens is belittled in just that small sentence. You're not condescending, the others can be. I don't want to be condescending because I can't stand it when people are that way to me. And some people genuinely don't understand something, and that's kind of what I want to do. I want to kind of set the record straight and help people understand a particular thing. And I don't want to be a jerk about it, because there was one point in time where, I didn't know a lot of stuff, and I thought, man, I felt embarrassed to ask a question. And I don't ever want somebody to feel embarrassed to ask me a question. The difference between theory and hypothesis is clear, but you have a question. I'm doing great, thank you. Sure, ask me your question. I'm going to keep going on about it's just a theory, and when I see your questions, I will answer them. So if theories change, some people are like, well, theories can change. Well, yes, laws can change too, but it's only slightly, and with added intricate details that have well-established knowledge from facts. So, if we have a slight change in theory or a slight change in a law, the thing is that we essentially learned a bit more about something, so we have more details. Why do scientists call it string theory? It's not proven yet. Well, you can have an explanation of something and have some evidence to support it, but there may not be enough substantial evidence that a lot of scientists would say, okay, this is definitively fact. We have some evidence, but it may not be as much as people would think. I have 1 or 2 points within science, and I'm questioning, but I don't assume I'm right. In fact, I'm searching to prove myself wrong. Not that any of those points are in biology. Well, that's kind of what scientists do. So anytime I would run an experiment, whatever my results were, I would have to go back through and pick it apart a little bit and go, okay, so these were my results. I would repeat the experiment, and if they weren't what I expected, I would run it several times and see if I got the same answer to make certain there was no human error. Maybe I pushed a different button, things like that. So if I get the same results, then I would go to a colleague and say, hey, what do you think about this? And they were like, oh, wait, is it that instrument? Did you have it on this setting? Yes, I did. That's wrong, and that's why you got those results. There you go. And then if it's the results that I wanted, then I would go back and I would go, okay, and I would generate a brand new experiment using a completely different type of instrument to show that my results were the same. So when I was working to develop a breast cancer test, we used not only dark field microscopy, we also used Raman spec. We used DLS to characterize our nanoparticles in our exosomes. We also used TEM, which is electron microscopy. So you have several different things coming together to reinforce your hypothesis. Yes, string theory is a theory. It's just not an accepted theory yet since it's lacking enough evidence. That's exactly what I was trying to say, Wesley. Thank you. So here's something for you. When I was teaching high school, I once heard a science teacher of physics say, gravity really should be a law. This man had taught physics and chemistry for 20 some odd years to high school students, and he showed me, and I was a second-year teacher at the time, and he showed me to high school students, and he showed me in one sentence that he had no idea the true difference between theory, law, hypothesis, and fact. String is not a hypothesis. I wouldn't say string theory is a hypothesis because they have several experiments that have evidence that supported hypothesis. String theory is an explanation as to why certain things happen. A hypothesis is kind of reinforcing, well, when you go through an experiment, you're trying to see what a particular answer to a question is. While it might be string theory, it's a bit more detailed than that. The answer isn't string theory. The answer reinforces string theory. I don't know if I've made that clear. So that particular high school teacher showed me in one sentence he had no idea the true difference between theory, law, and hypothesis and fact. And so that is that. I mean, and he'd been teaching 20 years, and this was my second year as a teacher, and I was like, oh my gosh. That's when I get sometime positive to a point. I just say, so far this topic seems to be correct. You avoid absolute yes. But this is a commonly misunderstood concept that I encounter this particular thought process in nearly every aspect of society that I have experienced. So it's pretty weird how that's a thing that happens so often. And so, why does this method work? Why does the scientific method work, do you think? Why does it work? It works. How are you guys with Back to the Future? I like that show. I think it's fun, that particular film, those series. Our education system has been problematic for a while. So Wesley was bringing this up. And the thing is it's more rote memorization and less critical thinking. And that's something that's easily implemented early on in early education. And we need to start training children to think critically. And I'll talk about how we see this across disciplines in academia here in just a minute. So, it works. The scientific method works. And why does the scientific method work? No matter what the results are, you know they are results that will either reinforce or eliminate your hypothesis. It causes you to go back, and so whenever you get your results and you come to your conclusions, it causes you to go back and reevaluate every aspect of your experiment to ensure that there is no human error. Excuse me, can I do a show on critical thinking maybe? Yeah, I could probably do that. It works because it's self-correcting and overall flexible and it doesn't discriminate. That's true. And reproducible results are key. That's right. So between what you see versus what you actually see. Yeah. And so instrumentation kind of helps give us an unbiased perspective. And so when you go back and reevaluate every aspect of your experiment to ensure that there was no human error, you also look at the instrument that you used. You should have very good solid knowledge of the instruments that you're working with. And then what you do is you repeat what you did to see if you get the same results, making certain there was no human error, like I mentioned before. And once you reinforce or eliminate a hypothesis, you can move on to the next step. Either test your hypothesis in another way with different types of instrumentation to reinforce its credibility, or you make a brand new one and then you start working to see if you can completely eliminate that hypothesis. And another thing, people sometimes think scientists go in order of the scientific method. That's not necessarily the case. They can go out of order from time to time and during early experimentation. But that is the key I keep telling the anti-science people I know. If it is to have a chance to be true, it has to produce functional results that seem to go over their head, sadly. Yeah, the method hypothesis must be falsifiable for it to work. So you have to be able to, how can you make it false? Yes. How can you make it false? That's the thing that you can do. So you start eliminating variables to show when is it going to be wrong. Yep. And so, when I was mentioning scientists can sometimes go out of order with the scientific method, what I mean by that, you think it's crucial to teach children the difference between fact, opinion, and belief. Yeah, I agree with that. So if you're a scientist and you've started working on an experiment and you've been going through early experimentation and you have a particular hypothesis, you can sometimes see that it's wrong. It might be eliminated quickly due to early results showing that it is problematic. So if you're getting early results that kind of muck up and aren't reinforcing your hypothesis, that's the time to say, okay, shut down. We don't want to go to the next phase of the experiment. We've got to go back and reevaluate everything to see what's happened. Oh, thanks for the video. You gotta go. Thank you. I'll see you next time, Wesley. So the method works because it will always show you the results that will either support or destroy your answer on trial, your hypothesis. And so it does self-correct. Then you come up with a new answer, or you move to reinforce the one that is accurate, and then you try to debunk it. Other scientists then can repeat what you do to either support, debunk, or add a little bit of extra information to your hypothesis. So that's all inherently important as well. So, haha, thank you. Thank you, Philia, for hopping aboard. So, who can science? Everybody. And I like this quote. from the Dead Poets Society. No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. They can. And anybody can science. That's something that people, they always tend to get really, really scared. They're like, why can't science? That's just too hard. No, you science all the time, and people don't realize that. They do it every single day. It's just a lot. The difference is you're not writing it down. So let's talk a bit about that. Here's a thought experiment. All right, so we're going to engage in what we call a thought experiment. You have a flashlight, a torch if you're in the UK. You might call it a torch. It's not working. That's your observation. All right, you're like, it's not working. What could be the reason? Why isn't it working? That is your question. What's the answer to your question? Batteries or hardware failure? These are potential hypotheses. So sometimes scientific method gives us discovery answers. We don't know 100% what the answer is. And so we're going to try to figure out which one it is. You like to wait until someone else has tested a previous work, especially when it comes to a cure has been found for something. Yes, that's a good idea too. The more experiments and the more studies you have for a particular hypothesis, the more credibility it gains, especially if they're able to reinforce it. All right, so we have our flashlight. Let's try the batteries option. So we do have two potential hypotheses, and the one that we test are the fresh batteries into the flashlight. This is the experiment. You try turning it on. Does it work? Yes or no? If no, then it might be hardware failure. If yes, then you have solved the problem. And congratulations, you've just scienced. So that's kind of, we do science all the time, and people don't realize it and they don't think about it. I am hypothesizing that anti-science people think it as a matter of conversion that makes said topic true or false. And I think that is the key, that and what I am trying to prove or disprove. Yes, you know, so they think it's a matter of opinion and not the fact that it is or isn't. And so a lot of people seem to think that science is mostly opinion, which is not true. It's facts. And so, oh, do you mean conversation? So when you're dealing with anti-science people, I often find that they just misunderstand the process. They misunderstand the terminology, and they think it's opinion, belief, that's not based in fact. And so you meant conversation in that. Okay. Another example. Babies are perfect examples of scientists in the purest form. All right. What do? They see something. All right. They see something. They wonder what it is. Perhaps it is food. So how do they experiment? They put it in their mouth. They put it in their mouth. And they're like, ooh, no, it isn't food. And then they take it out. Sorry. And then they take it out and they look at it. They even perform peer review by giving it to their friends for them to put into their mouths, reinforcing the fact that it is not food. We are all born scientists, all of us. And we need to cultivate that curiosity once more. Oh, Opal, you meant converting. Okay. You perform science every single day. And I kind of think it would be interesting if you took one day, just one day out of the week, and you wrote down every time you solved a problem by breaking it down into the parts of the scientific method. You'd be surprised, and you'd probably surprise yourself and possibly have a bit of pride in how often you solve issues. It's a pretty cool thing to be able to do. So I kind of charge all of you guys, just spend one day writing down all of this, just make a list of all of the problems that you solved, then go back and write out, according to the scientific method, what was the problem, what was your hypothesis, how did you go to look to find that answer, was it the right answer? You know, if you just broke it down into that type of thinking, not only does it kind of help you practice critical thinking, but it also shows you just how often you perform the scientific method, which is really freaking cool. And if more people did that, I think they would be pretty surprised and kind of have more of a sense of pride just to show how smart people really are. So I want to talk to you a minute about all the different disciplines that use some form of the scientific method. So here we see the scientific method in other disciplines, and this trial and error process, when performed effectively, drives just about every aspect of academia and in the workplace. And how many times you reused a solution to a problem and had it work again? Yes. See, and that's the thing. Sometimes you can run into issues that you have for a particular thing at work. If you just wrote it down, then you'd have the answer every time it messed up. So, we see the scientific method in just about every single discipline of academia. It uses some form of it. English, math, anthropology, visual arts, psychology, music and theater, education, history. All of these different groups use some form of the scientific method, especially when they get into research. So it's not just exclusive to scientists. And it's not just exclusive to the sciences. We see it in the arts. We see it in literature studies. We see it in math. We see it all across the board. And that makes it pretty cool. So when I'm talking about this, every single discipline in academia uses this in some form of the scientific process, but the process is always the same. So let's take a look at how one of the forms that they could use. So here's one form. What is the question? So let's say you're looking at a math problem. Math, English, the arts, they all have some sort of this process. So what is the question? Let's say it's a math problem. What do you think the answer is? That's a kind of an idea of like an early hypothesis, an early idea of what you think the answer might be. And then how are you going to find that answer? If it's math, you're going to try different equations. If it's English and you're like, well, I think the answer to this particular question is going to be found in this book. Then you look for the answer. Did you get the answer right? Why didn't you get it right? Or, or why is it correct? That's just as important as why it's not correct. And then you redo and double check your answer. And if it's not correct, you have to start all over again, but that's okay. The flat earther guy that built a steam rocket to try and prove science's bunk was doing science. Well, he was misusing science. That's a bit different. So what I find, especially with individuals who misuse science, we look at, when I talked about the flat earther person in my flat earther video, when I talk about the flat earthers, they ran an experiment and they were like, see, look, the earth is flat, but he wasn't taking into consideration refraction in regards to the water and his telescope. So they'll come up with results and they'll use science to get the results, but they didn't go back and look and think, what were the factors that affected my results? That's kind of the difference there. So you could use science, you might get some results, but your results can be misconstrued when you go through a conclusion if you don't try other ways to reinforce your hypothesis and go back and reevaluate why you got those answers. So even if it reinforces your hypothesis, if the answer is reinforced by your data, it's important to be able to explain why. And that's something that a lot of people who misuse science just don't follow through on. Apply in science to any previously held worldview is my guess. Okay, so then we've got this lovely thing. What about bias? You're like, I got the answer, and bias is just like, snap. Nope. Nope. We got all kinds of biases going on in our little brains, or our big brains, I've been figured out how to get correlation to make sure the whole making reality is not just my perception, because if it's true, then they might be a key to dealing with deniers. You've been trying. So when you're dealing with deniers, and even with ourselves, it's okay, Opal, your spelling sucks. My spelling sucks too, and also autocorrect is very mean to me, especially on my Twitter. So, and then I have a whole bunch of retweets on something with like a spelling error, and I'm like, oh, so it's okay. So, bias is the killer of critical thinking, and good news is we all have it. We all have this lovely thing called bias, and it doesn't go away. So what do we do about bias? You're not alone. Yay! Yes, I can't spell at all. Blind expert peer review is important here. Yes, yes it is. And so scientists limit bias in many different ways. Peer review is one of them. In blind experiment peer review, yes. And what they do is they redo a lot of experiments to reinforce hypotheses, and they do completely different experiments to test their hypotheses. And they remove variables and factors to see when is their hypothesis wrong. They also undergo peer review to ensure that their methods are sound and the data reinforces the answer on trial, the hypothesis. I'm not biased, you are. That is a type of bias in itself. It's called, I believe it's called blind spot bias. I actually did a show on that, the 20 cognitive biases that we all inflict upon ourselves that affect our decision making. Blind spot bias is one of them. And not everybody has access to a blind expert. That's true. And it depends on the journals too. So it's important to go through and kind of see if you're interested. The more prestigious journals are going to have more rigorous types of peer review. You just work with your bias by assuming it is there. Bias is not automatically correct or wrong. It's just blind. Yes. So if you understand what your bias is, that's quite helpful in making certain that you're keeping a very educated perspective of understanding. And it requires you to be very self-aware. Bias doesn't make you a bad person, but it's important to keep it in check. And that's kind of what I talk about in the cognitive bias video. And also, I do have a short video on what peer review, what scientists undergo in peer review. So if you're curious about the different biases in peer review, I've done other videos explaining it in detail in the types of biases and what scientists do to go through to get their work published as solid science. Now, scientists, they need to be able to answer critical questions with evidence in order to have a paper published. So if you've ever been to a conference and people think that scientists are just like, oh, it's a conspiracy, they're all just agreeing on this. If you've never been to a scientific conference and you ever want to go, I suggest you go sometime. Good show on biases. Thank you. Because they will sit there and they want to be the person that makes the person talking look wrong, because then they were the person who debunked the smart person who's talking about their research, you know, because it's a constant, it's like a one-upper. Scientists are just trying to one-up each other. So if you've never been to a scientific conference, you should, it's not supposed to be a contest, but in the world of academia, publishing is important. And and I will say this, there are some scientists, when they go to conferences, they will have friends of theirs ask them questions, and so they're able to answer them because they already kind of know what the answer is going to be. And so I've known a particular professor who did this. She had people that she would put, yes, egos. She would have a friend of hers that was another scientist, reputable in the community, that had good, strong questions that she could just fully answer, like really, 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 really thorough, to where it looked like, yes, I know what I'm talking about, because you want a bit of clout. There is some of that, but you do want to be able to defend your research. And if your research holds up to a lot of really hard questions, all that does is make you look, you know, really
really solid and respectable and reputable, and that you are a hard worker and that your science is good. Is peer review done mostly pre or post publication? Pre, mostly pre. And with the particular journals, when they publish a particular article, what happens is depending on the journal, the more prestigious journals are going to have rigorous peer review. And then at the end of that, once it's published, other scientists, especially if it's a prestigious journal, are going to tear it apart. They're going to look through it and try to replicate the results or add on to it and say, I'm going to take this because this is kind of relevant to my research. I'm going to use this method and add on to that. I hate that too, the whole scientists just agree bit. And then they point out how the scientist disagrees. What did he not get their check is what I meant, was what I want to say then. Yeah. So, but yes, it is a constant bit of going back and forth in regards to that. Yeah. What did they not get? So when somebody doesn't quite understand what's going on in regards to science, I almost just want to say, having been on the receiving end of having to defend research I did in education, I went through 2 conferences on my second master's. I had a first-year conference where I was grilled by my committee, and then a second-year conference. And I was working in a different lab at the time because I wanted to diversify my skill set. So my first-year conference was based on like cancer tests that I was helping to develop. My second conference was based on computational chemistry. And I got like grilled. Man, I was sweating by the time I was done. And the particular people that were on my committee had been professors. 2 of them had been professors for about 30 years. And the other one was the vice dean of the school. She was my mentor, like my particular research mentor. And they just grilled me. She grilled me ahead of time. She grilled me afterwards. You know, she grilled me. She had me well prepared for that because that's part of it. So when somebody says, scientists just all agree, I'm like, no, go to a conference and you will see lots of people calling each other out on their stuff saying, prove it. And then if you have like good solid answers, all that does is reinforce your work. So you kind of want those critical questions. You want people to ask you questions because it shows they're interested in your work. And in addition to that, it gives you an opportunity to defend it tooth and nail, say, this is what we did. So for people that go through and say, scientists just all agree, go to a conference. Go to a conference and sit there and listen to a talk and hear the people rip them apart at the end with questions. That's kind of fun too. Although it does show sometimes you can kind of see who the misogynists are, especially the way that they ask questions, and because I've seen some of that happen. And then you can kind of see people's biases at that point. You're like, oh, you have a certain type of bias that's quite prevalent in the way you just asked that question. So, but yes, those are things that I think people don't take into consideration in regards to science and with the scientific method. But the bottom line is this. I hear you, sister. The bottom line is this. When we're talking about the scientific method, what is it? It's a problem-solving process. Scientists use it because it's effective. It's self-correcting. We're able to go back. It's an easy form to follow. And we can repeat it and use it over and over and over again. It's effective because it's self-correcting. It self-corrects itself, and you're going to get results. You're always going to get results. Even if you don't get the results you want, those are still results. And they let you know that something's happened, and you got to go back and address that. You need to be able to explain why something didn't work. That's just as important as explaining why it worked. So both of those are relevant and very important knowledge. And anyone can use this method. You use it all the time. I charge all of you guys, just one day, write down all the problems that you solved, even if it was really quick in your head, and then go back just for an exercise to help you develop, strengthen your critical thinking. Break it down. So you solved this problem. What was the problem? What was the question? How did you solve it? Go back and look back over it. And how would you redo it? Would you do something differently? Science has to be accurate because when we use it on EMS calls, it has to work or people die. That's correct. If you like my videos, I do have a podcast called Hey ScientistMel. And one of the latest episodes I did is free speech in the scientific community. And so since we're talking about how scientists criticize each other, we need a space for free speech for scientists to be able to do that because lives are at stake. And I talk about a particular case where a doctor was given free rein and they kind of overlooked certain important steps, and some of his critics were punished for talking against this charming celebrity doctor. And so lives were lost because of his faulty science. And so that's one of the reasons why we need free speech in the scientific community to be able to address things. So I have a whole podcast episode and it's hashtag Hey ScientistMel. It is on iTunes and I have submitted it to Spotify for Android users. You're interested in my podcast? Well, cool. Well, let me switch screens here and I can show you where to find everything. I'm going to take a moment to show you some of my sources. Here we go. There's not a whole lot of sources I have for you in regards to the scientific method. If you just look in textbooks, I do have elsevier.com with peer review, and Live Science is a really good place to kind of check out different educational resources in order to help you kind of strengthen your scientific knowledge. Also, you know, I have stuff on my website. We need to reward papers that show negative results. Too often I hear that only positive results are published, or at least favored over the negative ones. Yes, there's a lot of issues in academia, especially with publications, because publications get you funding for grants. And if you have negative results, that's going to put you on the bottom of the grant pile. You need to be able to show that you have positive results associated with your research, because if you don't, then you're less likely to get any kind of funding. And so that's a problem that's associated with our particular society, with the fact that society and the government pushes really hard for results. If you're not those are published for the most part in that regard, if they're debunking something that's been kind of well established, you know. Oh, hello. So if you want, I have to take a moment to thank my patrons on patreon.com. They get early access to all of my podcasts so we can advance, and I'm currently going back through and revamping my reward system. So if you're a patron and you're on, like, I think it's the $10 up patrons, we can negotiate. If you're a $5 patron, negotiate. If there's something you want that I can give you, if there's, you know, personal bespoke content that you want, I can help you with that too. So I want to thank my patrons: Tony, Lauren, Jen, Carl, Melanie, Anthony, Paula, Carrie, Keith, Zachary, Patrick, Tony, Graham, Tristan, and Jennifer. They're currently my patrons. It starts at $1 a month. They get early access to my podcast. In addition to that, they get special rewards, and all of my rewards are negotiable. So if there's something that you want, man, just let me know and we can talk about it. So if you want to find me, I'm pretty much everywhere on the internet. I don't have my WordPress anymore. ScientistMel.com. ScientistMel.com is my website where you can find all of this other stuff. I am on YouTube, which some of you are watching me on YouTube now. YouTube.com/C/ScientistMel. I have a Facebook page. I'm on Periscope as well, and my Patreon. Everything is ScientistMel. So if you just type in ScientistMel into Google, it's going to take you somewhere here. But my website also has educator resources. Oh, my stream looked good on the YouTube side. Yay! Thank you for that. So my website also has resources. It has all of my slides from all of my shows and my podcasts with my sources are on my website, so you can dive a bit further. I also have started quizzes. So I normally have quizzes on Twitter in the form of polls on every Tuesday. I'm pulling those from Twitter and putting it on my website so people can take them over and over again. I have achievements that you can get for taking my quizzes and download them with your name on it and everything. So you can unlock achievements and leaderboards. This is all not meant to be a contest, but it's to help you with your scientific literacy and to let you know what areas you're struggling on. And if you want to learn more about it, then I can show you the sources to do that. And it's fun. So there's not a whole lot of quizzes there right now, but I'm adding them on there a little bit each week. And I'm generating biology, chemistry, and physical science-based quizzes that are formatted towards government standards of what the government expects high schoolers to understand by the time they graduate. So it'll be interesting to test your knowledge and to kind of see where you lie with that. So that'll be awesome. And if you have questions, you can use my hashtag, HeyScientistMel, because my ats fill up a lot on Twitter. But if you use that hashtag, if you have ideas for shows or topics you want me to talk about, either on my audio podcast or on my videos, even if it's a short video, you want a quick little video explaining something, hit me up on the hashtag, ask me questions there, or you can email me on my website, ScientistMel.com. And it's just what I do, and I love doing this for you guys. It's a lot of fun for me. So this has been The Science of the Scientific Method by ScientistMel. I just like Futurama. I thought that was a pretty cool gift. So if you have questions, feel free to ask me anytime. I love doing this, and I love helping you guys out with this. And this has worked out on both Periscope and YouTube, and I don't have to like upload it on YouTube now. It's already there. By the way, in my language, Mel means honey. Yay! I'm so glad. I'm so glad you guys could join me. I might push it later to 11 a.m. Central Standard Time on future Saturdays. And so, you destroyed. So I might do that because that gives me a bit more time to deal with any kind of technical error. So I might start pushing it to 11 a.m. on Saturdays, but I'm still going to stream on Saturdays. That seems to be the best time for the uploading frequency. You're in Germany. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for hitting me up on here. And if you have questions, like I said, message me. If you can't donate to my Patreon account, I do have a PayPal. If you can't do a monthly commitment, just message me. We can work out rewards then. You enjoyed this a lot. So thank you. I'm glad. Next week, next Saturday, I think I'll pull one of my old ones. Elephants have been in the news lately. So maybe I'll go back through and redo elephants. PayPal is better for you? Okay. Message me on Twitter and I can send you a link to my PayPal if you want to do a one-time donation. It just helps me keep the lights on. My patrons have been able to get me my website, better tech, all of the stuff that I've been able to do. I had to get an external hard drive. So all of the money I get from that just helps me keep the lights on and helps me generate more content so I can spend more time on it. So thank you guys. This was so much fun, and I will see you guys on the various forms of social media. Love your work. Well, thank you, Yvonne. I'm so glad you guys could jump on here. Sending squishy science hugs, big ol' hugs. Be passionately curious and stay loving learning and stuff. I do. Bye. My science lovers. I am at the Science Museum. I thought I would take you through here. Here's the entryway, pretty much the entry into the Science Museum. I don't know. I'm going to share this on Twitter. Hello. So this is the Science Museum in London. So this is kind of the entry point that we have. There's the doors into the museum. So I thought I would kind of take you guys through a little bit of one of my favorite museums in London. So this is the top. It's an absolutely gorgeous building. So I'm going to take you into the space section. So I'll flip this around for a second.
Hello. So I'm in London right now, and that's why I've been quiet on my science account. Just went to Natural History Museum this morning. Hello. And I had to visit Darwin. I always have to visit Darwin. I have to go and check out my favorite specimens in the Natural History Museum, the Darwin Center. So I posted some pictures there. Couldn't live stream there because that building is so big and they don't have Wi-Fi, but guess what? The Science Museum does. So I thought I would take you through and show you kind of the cool stuff that's here at the Science Museum. So you guys ready? So let's have a look at this.
This is what I'm viewing. So here, this is what they call the energy hall. All of the different ways that we've used to harness energy. Mills, here we go. It's a steam engine. There's a steam engine there. Here's a little art display where they kind of talk about climate change and nuclear energy. They have, it looks like bubbles. But over on the right here, sometimes they'll pose little questions where those lights are. It's like, would we rather spend money on nuclear energy or climate change? Which is a better choice there. Here's some more energy things. But you know, this is all fascinating and stuff, but I think people come here really to kind of check out the space and the rocket things. I was just over there and I'm like, you know what? Let's live stream. Let's show the folks what we got. Here's another engine. Oh, it's a fantastic, hello. It's a fantastic museum. I have to go to it every single time. Fully functional steam engine. Isn't that neat? They're working on it. Hello, hello. So, old steam engines they probably use. See if we can find a bit of information on this thing. It's working. Got it going. This is the horizontal engine, the driving force of a factory. So this would be used in a mill. There's an animation of it. There's one of those questions I told you about in the little ring there. So what do you say? London is fabulous. It's absolutely fabulous. They have an upstairs section, but I think where the meat of the stuff is, where some of the coolest stuff is here. It's going to probably be a bit loud, so I'll move you closer to my mouth so you guys can hear me. And check this out. Explore. Here, we've got various landing gear. Check that out, man. Isn't that cool? Models of satellites. There's the whole world. I tweeted a picture of myself trying to hold this. It was like, I got the whole world in my hand. There's the moon. And then over here, we've got some more space here. Let's see what this part is. This is the Viking biology experiment. This little piece here. And it's a part of NASA's Flight Fair biology experiment for the Viking lander missions. And the spacecraft scooped a sample of Martian soil and dropped it in the instrument, which analyzed it for evidence of biological activity. And the initial results seemed positive, but most scientists eventually accepted that this was due to other reasons. So this particular thing went to Mars, and it checked to see if there was cellular life in the soil. And they thought it would be positive, but it turns out, nah, shame. I don't know if I can go over there. It's kind of dark. Let's go to a section that's not dark. Look at this cool looking thing. Mars 96. Isn't this neat? Phenomena instrument. Scientists designed this to show how the solar wind interacts with Mars' atmosphere and magnetic field. This